mini computer.
And this is a relay, which is it is connected to this board. So we are actually trying to on and off with relay with the help of Arduino. So how does this system works is actually how this system works is actually we are using the code. When we run the code, so what it does, it automatically detects that on which port the Arduino is set. So actually what is happening is it tells the Arduino that if the percentage of the battery is above 80%, so stop charging. Okay? And if the percentage of the battery is below 60%, start charging. So what we are actually trying to do is to pause the battery cycle. So the question arises, what is battery cycle? So you are all clear with the battery cycle? So what happens when a battery is fully charged? It's harmful. Okay, so after 500 battery cycle, a normal battery loses its 20% efficiency. If it is 100% efficient, it will become 80% efficient after 500 battery cycle. So what we are trying to do is to pause the battery cycle. We are getting the battery in a loop. So it's the 79 you are seeing is my current charge, 79%. Okay, batteries, as soon as it will get 80, it will cut off the battery from laptop from charging and will drop down till 60. And at 60, it will start again charging. Everyone is clear?
Yes. Okay, now let's get into some details. See, as you considered as your iPhone problem was, okay, and like we are currently discussing lithium-ion batteries. What is the biggest enemy of lithium-ion batteries is overheating and voltage fluctuations. Now, for voltage fluctuations, we have this trickle designing in the charger itself that takes care of it, okay? And now we come to the overheating. Overheating does some like chemical changes in the battery. It's basically a semiconductor thing that reduces the efficiency of your battery, which works how it is told, the battery life cycle thing. Okay. Now, what we are dealing here with is that can anyone guess why are we limiting it to 60 to 80%? Any guesses? Anything? Yeah?
Optimum efficiency at that particular range.
Okay, optimal efficiency exactly means? Like you want to maintain it over there. Yeah, okay. Okay, let's get into further details. What happens is when your battery, it is said that when you have a lithium ion battery, you don't charge it above 4.2 volts and you never discharge it below 3.3 volts. Now when you reach up to a optimum percentage of 80%, your battery is charging from 4.0 volts to 4.1 volt. And believe me, this 4.2 to 4.1 difference, that 0.1 volt difference does make a lot of difference. It's like if your battery is deteriorating after 500 life cycles, then for that 0.1 volt difference, when you're using at a 4.1 or 4.0 volt charging time, like that 80% thing, then it continues up to 1000 life cycles. This is that much efficient. Okay, and for the minimum percentage, you don't go below 3.3 volts. So 60% is a very efficient voltage. Keep it 50 to 60 for an approximate, but never go below 30%. Okay, below 30% it goes below 3.3 volts, and that is really harmful for your battery. Okay, any questions? Nothing at all. Did no one understand the concept?
So, any questions?
Can you give some idea of Arduino code or?
Yeah, Arduino.
Can we have Python code?
Yeah. The code I am using a PyFormata library. Normally, Arduino runs on C code. We write codes on Arduino on C. Yeah. So for this, we have used PyFormata library. What it does, it helps to write the Python code on Arduino. Okay, so we are getting a signal telling Arduino, okay, switch it on and off in Python. Okay, we are normally sending true and false, a simple signal. Yeah, relay is attached to Arduino, and relay is acting as a on and off switch. Because from laptop it goes to Arduino, or because relay is only works on analog signals. So what happens is you can't send analog signals from your laptop to the relay. So we have to use an interface in between. So we use the Arduino. And what relay does is as soon as Arduino receives a signal that he has to on or off, he sends the signal to the relay and relay cuts off it. And if you want to see the code is all available and on my GitHub repo. So
technically, when the relay receives a true value, it starts charging. When it takes a false boolean value, it stops charging. That is what happens.
it's a very basic concept that it's about how you save your battery life. We figured out because our laptop battery life was just degrading day by day.
Below par.
Yeah. So here is the battery life. So all the codes from presentation to the code we have used on Arduino to the code we have used on our system, it's all available. We just took it out as a hardware just to make it for all the laptops, not just to that Windows user है भाई इनको चाहिए इनके पास ये technology हमारे पास नहीं है. So we make it for everyone. So that even Mac already has, but Ubuntu systems, the Debian ones and the Red Hat ones can easily use this technology.
Arduino is okay, or we can do it on Raspberry?
And basically Arduino is much cheaper. We can use Raspberry Pi, but Raspberry Pi cost around 2800, 2900, and whereas this Arduino cost around 400, so it's much cheaper, and relay cost you around 40 rupees, I guess. So your whole setup is ready in 500 bucks, and you are making your battery life, which is supposed to be degrading at 3 years, is now degrading at 5 years. So you
also, if you are thinking of like how does this work, how efficiently is this working? The thing is, if you notice the percentage of the charging left on your battery, if you're going on that, then that is not essentially a true value, because what it shows is the expected value, like the way you're using your battery, the way it is being consumed from all this time, the system learns and then it tells you the expected battery life remaining. So don't go on that, that is not exactly the true value. This might alter that thing. Okay.
And moreover, this technology is being used by many of the big firms like Tesla also. So if you want to go deep in it, you can ask me outside. It's something Tesla Power
On.
Power.
Tesla Power On.
Yeah. So that is also Tesla is working also on that. So you can go and Google it and how things are working, how people are making a simple battery more and more efficient so that it can be reusable.
Any more questions? Anything?
Bishop, are we done at the time? We have time.
We do have time. Kuch bhi question.
Guys, you understand the concept?
Yeah. Algorithm क्या लगाया, logic क्या लगाया, relay कब switch on होगा,
Algorithm.
Algorithm is as simple as that. First of all, I want to tell one more thing. I just question to my mind. There is you can't control the when you plug in your laptop, you can't control the AC power input. जब आपने अपने लैपटॉप में चार्जर लगा दिया, आप उसे रोक नहीं सकते चार्जिंग होने से. I'm talking for Debians especially. Okay, the only firmware that provides is Dell. आप Dell में ऐसा कर सकते हैं. आपके लैपटॉप चार्जिंग लगा हुआ है बैटरी, and you can still pause the charging. But you can't do for every laptop. Only Dell provides that firmware. Okay, so what we did is हमने laptop there is a battery file. As soon as you will run this code, the code will automatically detect that which Arduino is connected to which port and what is your battery. There is a battery status file actually in your laptops. So it will automatically detect the battery status file. You no need to search for your laptop that where it is and how it is. It will automatically detect and it will tell you that we are working on a web application also on this, so that you can get the graph view and all. So it will tell that what is the current percentage of your battery. If it is, it's simple, if else concept, that if it is 80% above, just we give a signal to relay that it's true. The relay, signal to Arduino, the Arduino tells to relay, okay, cut off this thing. And when the signal, when the laptop detects that it's below 60%, it again signals to Arduino that switch on the power, and that's how it works.
The Boolean values, they do it all. The true and false is all you need to execute this code.
Okay.
Can I have more questions?
One thing I want to know, that for using this, we must have to connect it every time to the AC power or power adapter.
Yeah, that is an issue, we think, because see, unless the charger is connected, we cannot really cut off or do anything. That is all on the consumer. You have to keep it connected, and I guess the laptop is not so much of an issue because you can keep it connected for as long as you're working. The mobile phones will have somewhat an
Yeah,
issue.
mobile phones actually we don't have connected every time with AC power, na?
That is the thing. See, one alternative is you can use a power bank.
Yeah.
So you can simply code in power bank, and we'll be happy that it works somewhere.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
not so much, but yeah, we can find alternatives, can't we? More questions? We really have a lot of time. We can discuss a lot of things.
You discussed about iPhone. What about Android?
See, Android, as I told you before we started the talk, is they use nickel cadmium batteries. And if you are using a nickel cadmium battery, there is an advice that you do the fully discharge and the complete discharge thing with your batteries to have a better life, to have a better battery life. The partial charge thing works with the lithium-ion batteries. That is the Apple batteries, right?
But nowadays Android phone also have lithium ion batteries.
Yeah, so
That is exactly a plus point. We are progressing towards that. Okay, so see, if you know that your Android phone has a lithium-ion battery, you can plug into the code. You can use the code. You just have to make sure that it is a lithium-ion battery.
Yeah, because we were just focused lithium-ion battery because our laptop had that battery only.
No, actually in my phone, the battery is on lithium ion.
Yeah, so that's good.
That's really nice. Lithium-ion batteries are indeed better than nickel-cadmium batteries. That is a proven fact.
So
Awkward silence.
One more thing I want to know, that the code has been run on our system or phone, or that we may connect from internet for running that.
no, the code will run on your system. It's a simple Python code. You just you can write a bash script that it will run on automatically as the system will start. So that's not an issue. It's simple, and it has an interval so that your system will not feel the load also. So it has a timer of every 5 to 10 seconds. It will so the system will also not hang out. So
If you have the hardware, you can just basically run it on a terminal.
and
That's all.
hardware is not also that बहुत मुश्किल है. It's just simple.
It's a very
Arduino.
simple thing, connection.
See, my battery is like 79% less, so the relay has been switched on. I will show you. This orange light is showing. It's showing that my laptop is charging, and you can see that my laptop is charging here. So it's charging. So as soon as the battery will go below above 80%, it will cut off.
Automatically cut.
Yeah. So actually we have automated that thing so that you बार-बार जाके आपको बाहर plug on and off नहीं करना पड़े.
No, actually for laptop it's okay, but for phone I may have to run that code on some file, so that I may have to install that file.
Yeah. So for
Running the code, I don't think so. It must be so much an issue than the charger thing. Like you need to have the socket plugged in.
that's a bigger issue
That's a
because
better problem
and,
because getting the code run in the system is not at all a problem.
and moreover you can run Python code on Android. There is an app for Android also that runs Python code over Android.
By the name of Python, I guess.
Yeah.
Python 3.
Just search over Play Store Python and you will get that app.
Anything else?
That's it. Okay.
Choice but to wind up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just
just write there and write down your name and propose the lightning talk. Anyone, if is anyone interested, you can just propose it. And yes, it would be a 5 to 10 minute talk. So after this, we would be going to proceed to lunch. You could go to the if you want to register for a lightning talk, you could go to the registration desk. So now we can proceed to the lunch. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone. Am I audible? Hello. Hello everyone. This is functional testing using mobile apps using Appian and Python. I work as an Android developer in Gojek, India. So Gojek basically is a transportation, couriers, food delivery, and shopping services provider in Indonesia. The word Gojek comes from the Indonesian word ojek, which practically means motorcycle taxi. So recently, Gojek has also diverged its portfolio of services to include medical, health, payments, and many others. So Gojek has about 10 million downloads on the Play Store. That's Android. And at this scale, we face a lot of problems. And in this particular talk, I'm going to describe how testing in general will help you resolve those problems and combat them in an effective manner. So at scale, you only face problems. Let's take an example. For example, you're buying the product on your favorite shopping application, and you press on the checkout button over there. Is it visible? You press on the checkout button over there, and when you press over it, the application crashes. Boom. Or for instance, you migrate from one device to the other, and while migration, you realize that the app does not work as expected on the other. The user would practically uninstall the app right away. And it's not just us who face these kind of problems, it could be you as well. So we have a story to share. So recently, we were working on a project in which we were required to add some new functionality on the legacy code base that we had. But here is the catch. Adding more features comes at a risk. There are two main problems that we faced. First problem, when you try to add new features, there's so many moving parts in the application that you're uncomfortable changing anything. Reason being, you never know what you might otherwise break. Second thing is, when there's so many users already on your platform, you don't want to migrate those users to your competition, which is why you don't want to crap up things. So let me ask you a simple question. Like, you guys are engineers. How would you solve this kind of a problem? Answers? Yes? Anyone? So, the problem is, we have a legacy code base. The problem with the legacy code base is, you need to add some new features on it. In order to add some new features, you need to modify the source code. And modification of the source code comes at a cost. You never know what you might otherwise break. And second thing, since there are so many users already on the platform, if you break something, users will migrate to the competition. What I mean by migrate to the competition is, they won't use your app, which would directly affect the business. How would you solve this kind of problem? Answer is testing, but what kind of testing? Anyone? No?
All the functionalities which were earlier, we will test all those and...
Sure, but why won't you do unit or integration testing in this particular instance?
How to do it on mobile?
Yes.
Web it is easy, but I'm not sure how to do it on mobile.
You can do unit testing on mobile as well. Problems with unit testing on mobile is that you need to have or architect your application in such a manner that it's unit testable. Essentially, you divide your application in MVP and MVVM patterns, which isolate the application from the Android ecosystem. Using which, there's no Android interaction while you're unit testing your application. You're testing the domain separately. Like, why not integration testing in this instance? There's a problem with the unit testing part. The problem is, you need to architect your application in such a manner that's unit testable. and you need to refactor a lot of code, which again, it's modification of a lot of source code. Again, you might essentially break something. Why not integration testing? Anyone? The problem with the integration testing part is that it essentially does not test the user flows, which is why you would go about doing functional testing in at least this scenario. Benefit with the functional testing part is you will test out all the user flows, the business requirements as the business documents, and you will be at least sure that there is a safety net, a certain amount of safety net for your application. So I have a functional testing demo, as in how, when you will implement all of this, this is how you come up with the automated part of functional testing. So essentially, here, we try to log in with a non-valid user. So this is WordPress, it's open source. You're trying to log in with a wrong email and a wrong password. And what is being validated is the user is on the login page itself. Now you'll essentially enter a valid username and password. And what you will verify is that the user would be on the home page. This is a valid username and password. Email. Now what we will verify is when the user tries to create a new post on WordPress, he will be able to create a new post because he returns to the home screen back. He's trying to log in with a valid username and password, and then he'll try to create a new post. Clicks on the new post title over there, enters the correct title and content. Presses on the publish button, and it returned back to the home screen, which means the user was able to create a new post. Now we will test the scenario that the user tried to create a new post with an invalid title and description, and we'll verify that the user wasn't able to create a new post. He clicks on the new post icon again, and he wasn't able to create it. So let me ask you a question. Why Python with Appium? Anyone? Like there are a bunch of frameworks across the Android and iOS ecosystem. Why not anything else? You guys are Android and iOS developers, right? Yeah, that is one aspect. Yes. Apart from that, there are a bunch of other frameworks as well. Like Ruby is as good as Python if you compare it with. Right. The thing is, let's take an example of Calabash. Calabash is one of the industry standard frameworks out there. Problem with Calabash is that you're only limited to Ruby, which means you would have to learn Ruby first, which is a big task in itself. Second thing with Calabash is, just in case you want to test your hybrid apps on iOS, that would be a problem. Calabash does not provide you effective web view implementations, which Appium essentially does. Robotium essentially locks you down to only Android and Java platform, which is why it's not a good choice in this case. Let's take an example of Espresso. Problem with Espresso is it's essentially white box testing, which means you need to have your source code available. Unlike Appium, where you just need an APK, at least for Android. Same for iOS, or whatever the package is. Frank and MonkeyTalk are so bad that I won't even talk about them. That's, what I'll show now is a demo of how you would go about writing your own functional test suite. For that, you would need Python, Appium Server, Android emulator, that's optional. You could also use your device in this case. Also a BDD framework called Behave. Has anybody heard of Cucumber here? Cucumber, right? So does anybody know what a BDD framework is? Anyone? Yes. So essentially what Behave provides you, to start with, why Cucumber is not there for Python, which is why Behave is an alternate for that. What Behave provides you, it lets you document your business scenarios as features. And inside features, you have certain scenarios. In this particular case for WordPress, I have a scenario for the happy path of creating a new post, the sad path of creating a new post. In the happy path, I want to verify that the user tries to log in with a valid user and tap on the new post icon, enter the correct title and message, and click on the publish button. And when he does that, he should be returned to the home page back. That's the happy path scenario, right? The sad path scenario in this case would be the user tries to log in with a valid username and password, tries to create a new post with blank title and message in this case. When he presses on the publish button, he should not be returning back to the home page. Instead, he should be on the new post page back. So this is the kind of scenario that we have. The next thing is, inside these scenarios, there's something called as given, when, and then, blah, blah, blah. So these are step definitions of the scenarios. What step definitions do is, for each and every step definition, you would have a corresponding code base. This is how it looks like. What I'm doing is, I'll take the first example. When the user is on home page and logs in as a valid user, taps on the new post icon, this is how I'm trying to implement it. What I'm doing is, I go to the home page, log in with the user. On the home page, I tap in on the new post icon. When I press the new post icon, I enter the title and description, message actually. On the new post page, I enter the title using new post page.enter title method. The enter title and the new post is an abstraction that I've created for better object orientation. And I enter the content as well. And using the device utilities, I press the back button. Same as the step for publish. Essentially, I'm finding the publish button and I'm clicking it. In the last part, I'm verifying that the user is taken back to the home page by using homepage.validate active method. As you see over here, like nothing relates to Appium. Next, we'll see how you relate with Appium, meaning how you would go about interacting with the Android or the iOS systems. Appium provides you something called as an Appium GUI. So what an Appium GUI is you could connect your Appium Android and the iOS devices with it, launch the Appium server, and inspect the particular screen that the user has launched over there. What essentially you will do over here, right now the Android icon is selected. If you click on the Android icon, what will happen is you would have to specify the path of the Android APK. Meaning, you would have the package of your Android application, you would just specify the path, open the Android inspector, and it would open the application on your mobile phone or emulator, whatever is the case may be. The next part is, when the Appium inspector opens, this is the kind of screen that you see. So what it does is, you need to find the particular element which you need to interact with. In this particular case, I need to interact with the title edit text. And I need to interact with the content edit text. Essentially, I need to find the ID, and then I need to enter the particular text in that particular element. So I'll use the Appium inspector for that. This is the actual code which helps you enter the text in that particular field. The driver, as you see inside the enter title and enter content methods, is the Appium's client for Python. What I'm doing is, I'm trying to find the element by ID. And this ID is being obtained from Appium's UI inspector, the post title in this case. Similarly for post content. And for the publish method, click publish, I'm trying to find the element by ID using menu post and trying to click on it. If you implement this particular piece, this is the kind of implementation on the right side as you see. That's what Appium would do for you. That's how you would create a new post. In order to validate the creation of a new post, you would use a helper like validate presence of an element located by ID. This validate presence of element located by ID uses Appium's WebDriver wait. So Appium basically extends from Selenium, which is why WebDriver wait is being provided over here. So I'm waiting until an element is being located by the ID. If no element is found, it essentially throws a no such element exception. I'll be showing a video of all this as well, so no issues about it. And this would be the code for validating that no creation of an invalid post is there. Meaning when the user tries to create an invalid post, he's not able to create one. So I'm verifying that the presence of element located by ID, which is post content and menu save post, is there, which means that the user is on the new post page itself. So I'll show a demo of Appium. Do we have time? So to start with, I'll show you a little setup of what kind of a directory structure you would follow and what will be the prerequisites. So in the command line, I've created certain folders: APKs, features and requirements.txt. APKs is the folder wherein my APK lies. Features is the folder wherein all the feature sets, the business documentation would lie. Requirements are essentially the software that I need. For example, in this case, I need Appium's Python client, and I would need Behave. Yes, that's what I have. The next thing that I'll do is install all the requirements. So my system already has all the requirements. Yours might not. So the third thing is desired capabilities. Desired capabilities would specify what kind of a session in Appium you want. For example, in our case, I just want to test an Android application. Did someone say anything? No. Desired capabilities specify what kind of an Android session you want, meaning an Appium session you want. In my particular scenario, I just want to test an Android application. With the platform version 5.1, device would be Nexus 5. And this would be, the context.driver would be where my Appium server has been launched. So Appium server is essentially a Node.js server, which lets you interact with the Android application. So what I say is, before executing any of these tests, before everything, just set up my desired capabilities. The next thing that I'll show you is how you would go about writing a feature for Behave. What you would do first is, you would locate where your APK is present. But I clicked on the Android icon on the top, and I located where my APK is present. Thereafter, I launched the Appium server. So this, the 200, oh, it's not visible. So you get a 200 response from the Appium server status, which verifies that the Appium server is running now. On the top side, there is a search icon, which is basically the UI inspector for Appium. What it would do is, it would take an XML snapshot of your Android application, using which you could interact with it. In this particular video, I'll show you how you would go about writing a login and authentication functionality for Appium, how you would automate that. For that, you would need to find the username edit text, you would need to find the password edit text, and you need to find the sign-in button, and you need to interact with it. And all of that will be automated. For that, I'm just clicking on the username or email edit text and the sign-in edit text, and I'm finding the ID over there. So ID is visible in the details column right next to the the Android screen. Yes. So there is a details column right next to the Android screen. So this would be the Android emulator, right? XML snapshot of that. The ID would be on the left-hand side, where you see a lot of text over there. Right, left, on the left side. The next thing that I would do is write a feature for it. The feature would be essentially a business requirement, the documentation of what the business wants. Now it's about the authentication part, right? I would name it feature authentication. The scenario would be a login using correct email and password. Then I should be on the home page. Simple as it is. Make sense? That's how you would go about writing a feature. Next, I'll show you how you would go about writing these step definitions for it. As in, how this particular feature will be automated. Essentially, you'll interact using the Appium client with the Appium server. For the first piece, I need to log in using a valid username and password. So I write a step definition by saying I log in using the correct email and password. it visible? Can we just? Visible, right? What I do next is I find the element, which is the text view, the edit text for the username. Note that the NUX username is what I obtained from Appium's UI inspector. The send keys method is used to send text to it. Send text to it, meaning if there is an edit text, you will need to enter some text over there, right? So this method is being provided by the app, driver itself. Now the next thing that I need to do is find the password edit text, and I need to enter the password over there. As of now, this is being hard-coded. You would essentially in production design a much better application, but this is the most simple way to do it. Now I will find the sign-in button, and I will try to click on it. The click method is being provided by the driver itself. The last statement is to verify that user has been taken to the home page. I'll write a step definition for it as well. I'll verify that the elements on the home page are present. Just fast forward it. So what I'm doing is, I'm waiting until the presence of the elements located by certain IDs are present. And I'll get the IDs for the home page using the Appium's UI inspector again. This is the home page, and I'm verifying that that particular ID is present. The next question you might ask is, how would you go about speeding up your test? How would you have a separation between unit and functional tests? The problem would be, it's a very bad design to push all the tests inside the functional test suite itself. Let's keep something inside the unit and only test the business requirement in the functional test suite. More so, in order to speed up your tests and validate whether the application is working fine across a multitude of devices across the Android platform, for example 2000, you would essentially use a service like Android Device Farm, which lets you test your application across all those platforms. You don't need to buy them explicitly. So that's about it. Questions? Anyone? Yes.
I have a question like, when you do functional testing, most of the time you need to like, every time you log in to the system, then perform something.
Okay.
How do you like, in web I write test, I can isolate by like, automatically patching something in Python code before functional test run. So is such kind of functionality
Yes.
available?
Yes. So this functionality would be related to Behave. Behave is a BDD framework again. Behave provides you before and after hooks. You could passion that functionality over there. Does it answer the question?
Yeah, so basically you are able to interact with your application
Yes.
in non-functional way.
Yeah, since you need to set up some state.
Right, yeah.
Yes, in order to do that, you would use before and after hooks. I'll show you a quick demo of that. Like I was using Behave's before and after hooks. Just a minute. In the desired capabilities section, as you remember, there was a before all and after all hook. Right. That's what you would use. Just yes. Any other question?
So this set of Python statements, the writing inside the API, you are writing, or is it?
No, I'm not writing that inside a Python GUI framework. Sorry, not APM GUI. I'm not doing that. What I'm doing is having a completely separate project. And what I'm having over there is a folder for where my APK will reside, a folder for my feature sets. There will be a folder for step definitions where all the step definitions will reside. So what I'll essentially do is I'll just run the behave command. Behave. Right, and it will run all the step definitions that you have, all the features. And just in case there will be some errors, it will throw them right away.
So you have like step definition, APKs, and
Yes, I have a source code which I could share with you guys. Does it work? Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Have you written any of the functional test cases for iOS apps?
I haven't written one because I am an Android developer by myself. But what you could do is, since the flow is almost the same, essentially you need to replace these Android IDs with the iOS IDs. That's kind of the most basic way to say it, but there might be some complications over there as well.
Basically, I have a source code which has Objective-C and Swift both.
Sure.
So I haven't found a way to write the test cases and test both.
Okay, but since APM just requires the package itself, do you actually need the source code?
So, but it doesn't go into the deep parts, the legacy code. It just floats onto the most recent Swift code.
Okay, I'm not able to understand your question. Can we discuss that after the talk? Sure. What is that?
I was asking that since this is functional testing,
Yes.
I mean, it's not like white box testing or else.
Yes.
So how much coverage is provided?
See, it depends on how you design your application. The answer is, you will need to keep some level of testing inside your unit test as well. Again, which requires you to architect your application in such a manner that it's unit testable. So, you will essentially only keep the business level testing inside the functional test suite, just to verify whether the application flow works fine or not. So, there's something called as a test parameter. What you will do is, a lot of tests will reside in the unit test suite, the maximum number, that's the ideal case. Some tests will reside in the integration test, whereas very minimal, just the business requirements, will be there in the functional one. So that's how you should essentially go about doing things, and that's being stated by Martin Fowler. Yes. Any other questions? Okay then, thank you.
So the next talk would be IoT, that is Internet of Things, with Python and Raspberry Pi. That would be taken up by Mr. Sandeep Nagar.
Hello everybody, very glad to the organizers to give a chance for something related to hardware apart from usual talks about software. So in this workshop we'll work on Raspberry Pi mini computer or microcomputer, whatever you like to say. So how many of you are have ever worked with Raspberry Pi? Okay, very few of you. Okay, so most of you will be seeing the Raspberry Pi for the first time, I believe. Okay. So I'll take everything from the very basics. We will do the very basic programs to control the pins and to control an LED, just to blink it. Blinking an LED is equivalent to Hello World. In the terms of hardware, blinking a LED is same as writing a Hello World program. Okay, so we'll simply write a Hello World program for that. So first, my introduction. I'm Dr. Sandeep Nagar. I did my MSc in physics with electronics as one of the specialization, electronics and radio physics. And then I did my PhD from KTH Sweden in material science. My topic was spintronics, which is next generation electronics. So I was an experimental physicist. So I didn't work much about software and doing simulations. So I was always working with instruments, and I didn't even do instrumentation. I just used those equipment. But after some time, something breaks down, and because I was doing things in Sweden, in Europe, repairing equipment is very expensive. Technicians come very expensive, sometimes more than the cost of equipment itself. So my professor always used to say, if something breaks down, you have to repair it. So then we started learning to do things, because while repairing, we would need to code also. Okay, so here the thing started. So I started doing Python, not Raspberry Pi, just Python. very basic Python and then started doing some simulations. Then somebody told me that there's a Raspberry Pi. It's a full-fledged computer. So I can show you this. Inside this box is equivalent to what your laptop can do. So this small board is equivalent to your laptop. It has 1 GB of RAM, okay, 1 GHz processor. It has 4 ports, USB ports. You can connect to net, wired connection. You can use a dongle. It can connect wirelessly. Okay, it runs Linux. It's a full-fledged computer. Okay, it doesn't have its own keyboard, its own monitor. You have to connect it. Okay, so that's why it's called a microcomputer. Okay, so we'll be using this, and you see some pins here. These are called GPIO pins. So you connect your devices here and write your programs to configure these pins and read data from this or write data to it. Okay, so this is how we do instrumentation. By the way, you can note down my email ID so that if you have any questions, you can drop an email to me. So why would I do IoT? Basically, after coming back to India, I couldn't do my own stuff because my instruments become very expensive. Electron microscopes cost 2 crores plus, and the bare minimum lab I would need would require 50 crores. So my university can't afford right now. So I started doing electronics. I started doing robotics. So I am in Department of Electrical and Electronics Engineering, and I started doing robotics. So then I started mixing Python with robotics. Okay. So that's why I started doing things. So I found that Raspberry Pi comes it fits very nicely there, because apart from, if you are a software engineer, don't want to work with hardware, that's also fine. You can use Raspberry Pi, you can remote login and run just like a normal computer. So Raspberry Pi can be anywhere in the world and still you can run your codes there. Okay. But apart from that, you would also do Internet of Things. Now, what is Internet of Things? Basically, your mobile phone is an Internet of Things device. Anything which is smart and can connect to net is Internet of Things. So if you remove internet connection from your mobile phone, that's not Internet of Things device. If you have internet connection in your mobile phone, a functionality it connects to net, that's Internet of Things. Very simple. Okay. So any electronic device which can connect to internet. Now connecting to internet would mean either two of these things: reading data or writing data, or doing both. Okay. So if you imagine these lights to be switched on and switched off using net, then these electric lights will become Internet of Things. Okay. So Internet of Things is usually used to either switch off or switch on some electronic device, or going one step ahead, not only switching on and switching off, but controlling its behavior, like controlling the speed of a motor, or controlling the amount of light an electric bulb is giving. So like LED would emit light depending on the voltage you provide. You change the voltage, the amount of light which comes out changes. So you can write a code so that it gives that functionality. Okay. So most of the device do not compute. My LED bulb does no computation. It just takes electricity, emits light. No computation involved. Okay. So to give this functionality of computation first and then connecting to internet would require a computer. So Raspberry Pi is that computer. You can do it with your desktop also, but then you would require 1 or 2 desktops to do this and actually place it physically there. Now problem with desktops is they are bulky. Apart from that, there is no problem. So if I have to put up a device at Everest and collect data from there, I would need to carry a desktop there. Won't you think carrying a desktop is difficult than carrying this thing. Okay, because this is equivalent to your desktop or laptop. So that's why we use Raspberry Pi. Okay. Now another thing, Raspberry Pi is not the only platform. There are a lot of other platforms. Okay, lot of commercial platforms also exist. Any device which can connect to internet, and if it has some kind of operating system, or even if it doesn't have an operating system, like Arduino. How many of you know about Arduino? Arduino microcontroller? Okay, some of you. Arduino is a microcontroller, it's not a microcomputer. Okay? You can put up Ethernet shield and it can still connect to internet, but it doesn't have an OS. Okay? Application directly goes to microprocessor and runs there. No OS. Okay? This has its own OS. Okay? So, what we will do and what we won't do in this workshop depend on how much time we have. Okay, so I'll try to, because most of you are at a beginner level, that's why I'm not giving the full flavor of Internet of Things. We'll just blink an LED, that's it. But beyond this, there's a whole new world of things which you can do. Okay, so please excuse me because I have only about 2 hours to demo and conduct a workshop, and that's why I'm just blinking LED. Okay, but if you are interested, you can contact me back and we can still work around. Now, open source hardware is as important as open source software. You all have been working on open source software, and you see how life becomes so simple because it's open source. You can configure it. So open source hardware makes even better. You can even change the whole electronic design is available on net. So you can make your own board. The whole electronic design is there. You can assemble this on a breadboard. You just need, there's a whole list of components, everything is available, how to connect, this is available. So you just take this thing and you can make your own. You can start selling it also, you just can't use the name. Okay, so for Arduino, many people are making their own Arduino. You can get like Arduino Uno, the very basic board costs about 1600 rupees, but if you go to a local shop, they will offer it for 400 rupees. That's not original Arduino, that's their own. They call it by different names, Induino, Freeduino, because they are clones. Everything is available, you make your own, start selling it. Okay? You can even improve upon the thing and make a fork, just like in softwares. You can make a fork and develop a device separately from one concept. So this is important to note that the same analogy works for software and hardware. Okay? Now, for hardware, you would need some basic information about electronics, like what are resistors, capacitors, voltages, currents, what is the power rating. Okay? Because when you would connect things, you have to connect them properly and give them proper electrical signal. Otherwise, even if the code is fine, everything is fine, it won't run. Either it won't run or it will burn. Okay? If you provide more power, it will burn. If you provide less power, it won't just run. Right? So there's an additional learning which you have to do if you start working on Internet of Things. Apart from just learning the language or learning with the operating system, you also have to learn electronics. Okay? Very basic electronics is fine. You don't need to be an electronic geek, but you must have some basic knowledge about positive terminal, negative terminal of a battery. How to identify, if I give you an LED, which is the positive terminal, negative terminal. Okay, resistors, how to identify the values and everything. Okay, so I won't teach those things here, I'll just give a demo for them. Right? So, as I said, there are two open source hardwares available to you. Why I chose Raspberry Pi from Arduino? It's for a very basic reason that with Arduino, you would need a laptop. Okay, with Raspberry Pi, if you have a HDMI monitor, keyboard and desktop, you don't need anything because it has its own OS. Arduino needs a laptop for interaction. For loading a program, you would write your program in a laptop, connect your Arduino there, and then feed it into Arduino's memory. Okay. Apart from this simple difference, it has these differences: difference in processing power, difference in memory. Okay. Difference in voltage level. So Arduino pins will give out 5 volts. Raspberry Pi will give out 3.3 volts. This is important for electronics because when you design a circuit, you would need to get the components according to the voltage and current ratings. Okay, so the values of resistors, capacitors, the whole electronic component will change simply because the one voltage has changed. Okay, so this is an important distinction. Last one is the most important thing, that Arduino doesn't have an OS. Raspberry Pi has an OS, right? So functionally they have a difference. Functionally, Raspberry Pi goes through this process that you write an application, your program, it calls some library functions, these library functions call some system commands, and these system commands interact with microcontroller. Okay, whereas in Arduino, your application directly goes to microcontroller. It doesn't have any OS layer. Okay, so you just write your code. So difficulty in doing things with electronics is you have to write code for everything. If you want to use your mouse, you have to write a code for that. If you want to do anything, you have to write a code for that. When you have OS, when you have library functions, when you have predefined system calls, you can simply use them. Okay, so you don't have to write code for everything. As I see, a lot of you have at least display devices. So if you want to get my PPT, you can get it from GitHub. This is the address. You can note it down. So it's Yoda 24. Very old. No, I was 24 years old that time. So not for GitHub. That's a common username I used to use, and it's simple to remember. That's why I still use the same thing. Okay. Then IoT RPI, and then you can clone it. Okay. So I'll continue. So I would take some of the theory. Okay, only at the last half an hour you will start doing something, because understanding theory would help you to do this thing afterwards anytime you want at your home. Okay, so this workshop, I'm sorry that this workshop is not hands-on from first minute. It's just only last half an hour you have some hands-on thing, but you would be able to do something hands-on only when you understand how to do it. Okay, so this is the same thing I said, but one important thing, when to use Raspberry Pi, to determine when to use Raspberry Pi is that, and when not to. Okay, you should not use Raspberry Pi if you are looking for strict real-time applications. Okay, like I had 3 PhD students. One of them is working on humanoid robot, 2-legged humanoid robot. So she's making a 2-legged humanoid robot. There I would need everything real time, because if the robot is falling, it must understand in real time so as to take a counter measure so that it doesn't fall down. Now Raspberry Pi doesn't guarantee real time. You can install real time OS, you can install real time Linux, it still doesn't guarantee, because if you use an OS that might not support many features of Raspberry Pi, and then you have to write them down yourself. Okay, usual OS which is used in Raspberry Pi is a version of Debian called Raspbian. So whatever Raspbian provides, you have to work with that, and Raspbian is not a real-time OS. Okay, so when you have real-time applications, you better use Arduino. and control Arduino using Raspberry Pi. So Raspberry Pi becomes your main controller, and from one of the pins you can control Raspberry Pi, another Raspberry Pi, or another Arduino or something else. Okay? Why it's not real time? Because it's a computer. You can't predict the availability of processor. Processor will process a lot of things depending on different scenarios. So it won't be free always, and you can't predict it. So as soon as your most important signal reaches processor, there's no guarantee that it's free to process it. Okay? So that becomes an issue with Raspberry Pi, real-time applications. So when you are working on embedded systems, some applications, you have to think this thing. Now, another important thing is, advantage of having an OS is, you have a command line interface, what you call text-based interface. You also have a GUI because it's a computer. I'll show you. It is a full-featured computer, so it has a GUI just like your laptop, and OS will have GUI. You'll have a web browser, you'll have a terminal, everything. Okay. So what we will be doing at the end will be using only text-based interfacing. Okay, because we will be remotely logging in. So if you are remotely logging in, so and then if you prefer a GUI-based interface, there's a lot of traffic involved. Okay, that needs a very high bandwidth connectivity and a very reliable connectivity. Whereas in a text-based interface, you just type one line of code, just goes there, does something, replies back. That's very light on traffic. Okay, so that's why I would demonstrate a text-based interface. So even for writing your program, you won't use a GUI interface. You would use the command line terminal of Linux. How many of you have worked on command line of Linux? I think most of you, because most of you are software programmers. So that won't be an issue. Most of you already know the basic commands, we'll just practice them, okay? For the benefit of those who don't know them.